All right, SIG 320. Let's do this. Okay, except actually that helmet is not that comfortable to wear. Yeah, I did a video 2 years ago on the SIG 320 and its uncommanded discharges, which I stand by, but in the past 2 years has started to look like it wasn't really the full story. Now, I would love to do a full, proper autopsy on what went wrong with the SIG 320, but I can't because I don't know, because I just don't have the level of detailed technical information to know exactly what is going on with 320s. But this has escalated quite a lot, especially recently. SIG made an attempt to end it, which did exactly the opposite of ending it, which they should have known better, I really think. But I kind of want to just throw out a couple things here, because it really bugs me to see really non-nuanced takes of, like, it seems like there's an awful lot of opinion out there that is very black and white. Some of it on SIG's side and some of it anti-SIG, but on both sides lacking, I think, the detail and the nuance that's necessary to really understand what might be going on. So let's start from the beginning. First off, I think SIG has gotten hit by a triple whammy of badness on the 320, and some of it they've done right by people on, and some they haven't. So first off, they had a drop safety problem on the guns early on that was absolutely their fault. They should have known better, and to their credit, once it was forced by guys like Andrew Toohey into the public knowledge, they did fix it, and they fixed pistols, and okay, maybe they didn't do it as proactively as we would like them to, but it did get addressed. It was a real issue. It got addressed. It is no longer an issue. Like, the drop safety thing is no longer an issue. But like, one of the non-nuanced things I see is, are people still bringing up the drop safety as a way to try and deflect concerns about the continuing issues that are still being seen on 320s. So anyway. Second problem, and to my mind, this is one that I don't see a lot of people talking about, but I think it's really important, and that is the SIG 320 has basically a fully cocked striker so that it can have a very nice trigger by striker-fired pistol standards. The Glock has a pretty long, fairly heavy trigger because the striker's not fully tensioned when the gun's at rest. The first bit of trigger pull is pulling that striker farther back. So in a worst case scenario, if a Glock striker, like, all of the safeties break at the same time and the striker drops on a round in the chamber without the trigger being pulled, the striker won't have enough energy to set off the primer. It'll light strike, and that's it. The 320, in order to have a better trigger, has a much more tensioned striker, to the point that if all of the safeties fail and the striker drops, it will set off a cartridge, and frankly, that's the problem we've been seeing. Now, at the same time, the 320 doesn't have a trigger safety either, and a lot of the models don't have a manual safety. They can, but they're available without manual safeties. And to my mind, this is a source of a lot of problems in the 320. Not the ones that people are specifically talking about now, but enough, like, this may be responsible for some, maybe many, of this combined pile of unintentional discharges that have plagued the 320. And had it not been for these, there might not be enough of any other kind of problem to arouse any particular suspicion, doubt, problem with the pistol. So the problem is, if you don't have a trigger safety and you have a light, short trigger press, this is getting, it's not quite to the verge of like carrying a 1911 cocked and unlocked, but it's getting there. It's a lot closer to that than a Glock is. And it means that the gun, the 320 with no manual safety, is far more susceptible to, like, oh, I accidentally have a piece of my shirt in the holster when I reholster it, and that catches the trigger and pulls the trigger and fires the gun. Or, oh, I was at a match and I was crawling on the ground and a couple of pebbles fell into my holster and one of them got snagged in just the right position. Then when I reholster the safety, that pebble hits the trigger and pulls it and the gun fires. All of those sorts of foreign object interference are just a lot more possible with a no trigger safety, no manual safety, short, light, quasi single stage trigger like you have on the 320. So for example, the P365 does not have these issues that the 320 does, and yet when I built a P365 as a carry gun, I very deliberately put a manual safety on it because, call me a FUD, I just don't trust that trigger being the only thing between nothing and a discharge of the gun when it's being carried, especially appendix. So I put a manual safety on it. My 320 has a manual safety, but that's because it's a military gun, and those did have the manual safeties. And again, I know people are already saying, yeah, but there are unintentional discharges of the guns with manual safeties, and I know, we'll get to that in just a moment. When I did my original, so anyway, that's number two, the problem, that the second part of SIG's trifecta of oh crap on the 320. The third leg of this is the stuff that we continue to see today, which sure looks like it's not a drop safety issue, and it's also not a whoopsie, something actually pulled the trigger. It sure looks like there are significant there are significant numbers, which doesn't mean a lot in the grand scheme of how many 320s are out there, but it doesn't take many to really unnerve people about carrying a pistol like this. And let's be honest, there are a lot of striker-fired double-stack polymer-framed pistols out there that you can choose from, and it doesn't necessarily take a whole lot for a reasonable person to decide, I just don't even need to consider that particular one. If there's a 1 in a million chance that something will go really wrong with it, well, 1 in a million chance is still more than the chance I get with these other 3 brands, which is 0. So I'll just start my product search by looking at those other brands and discounting this one entirely. Anyway, it sure looks like there's cases of it firing without it being touched, just from being jostled. And the theory that I've seen develop out there, which sounds plausible to me, is that parts are essentially, the theory is a shortcoming in part quality control, leading to an increase in the tolerances that are being accepted into production pistols, which allows for tolerance stacking that in a small number of completed production pistols can allow the sear essentially to slip and the gun to fire without the trigger being pressed, without the safeties preventing it. Because like the initial video I did 2 years ago was about the mechanical design of the 320, and the conclusion I came to was this mechanical design is sound and the striker cannot fall without the trigger being pressed. Because look, here's how it works, and it doesn't fire if you don't pull the trigger. However, that entire theory revolves around the assumption that the parts are made to the designed tolerances. Tolerance is the amount of variation in a dimension that you can have on a finished part and have it still be acceptable. There always will be variation in the dimensions of manufactured parts because manufacturing is not a perfect science. The critical engineering element of designing something like a fire control system with safeties, among many other things, is to ensure that as long as all of the parts fall within a specific range of dimensions, any set of mixed and matched parts will function the way that they're intended to. If your quality control slips and you start accepting parts that fall outside the defined range of safe tolerance, you can't get almost anything set up. You could, in theory, have some combination of parts where the pistol wouldn't ever be able to fire because when you pull the trigger, the lever that's supposed to pull a safety mechanism out of engagement doesn't, for whatever reason. And on the flip side, you can get pistols that can fire without the trigger being pulled. So the theory here sounds like SIG started accepting batches of parts with less rigorous QC in order to save some money and speed up production, and those resulted in tolerance stacking that occasionally, that 1 in a million or 1 in 100,000 or however, whatever it is, results in a gun that can discharge without the trigger being pulled. And that can happen with at the same time that the mechanism, if built to spec, is safe and effective. So now again, one of the things that I hate seeing is assumptions without recognizing any level of nuance. So there was a video that came out. Focus Strip did a video talking about how the striker safety lever specifically was a part that had been changed in manufacturing process and was one of the responsible elements for this happening, according to this theory. And the problem I have with that is it sounds plausible, but as explained in that video, and from what I saw, he just released a second video, a little bit longer take, but repeating this same claim that it was done because they changed that part from stamped to MIM. MIM is metal injection molding, and they did so to save $30 a pistol. And that claim is completely ridiculous because, first off, that part is clearly a stamped, like that's supposed to be a stamped part. That's going to be cheaper to stamp than it is to MIM. Metal injection molding is for parts that you can't stamp because stamping's cheaper. Like stamping's a lot cheaper. I would be extremely surprised if that part was even close to a single dollar in cost as a stamped part. The idea that you would save money by changing it to metal injection molding is dumb. It's clearly not sensible, and frankly, it calls into question the manufacturing understanding of anyone who would make that claim. So when I first heard it, I assumed this is a typo, this is a flaw in communications, like either the supposed secret source at SIG who said this misspoke, or Focus Strip misunderstood what he heard, or just typed it wrong, something, and that it would get, people would, if it was true, it would get fixed, because it ought to be more like 30 cents a pistol in cost reduction. Like, I don't know that the slide in the 320 costs $30. Like, this is not an expensive gun to make. That's how they got the contract for it, for the Army. Anyway, that fundamental of a flaw in the theory has to call into question all the other elements of the theory. If this is what a person said, but one part of it clearly can't be true, then is the whole story true? And I don't know. The problem is it still sounds very plausible to me that a failing in quality control or a loosening in quality control, say, involved in batch testing. Instead of testing every part, most companies will only do QC testing on a random selection of parts. And statistics says that you can test a random selection of parts, and if you do the right number of them, you will catch problems when they arise in manufacturing. But maybe they didn't. Maybe things got lax. I don't know, because I don't have any insight into SIG to have any of these details. I haven't talked to anybody at SIG about this. Frankly, I'm not really looking to, because, I mean, SIG has a whole pile of lawyers, and if there's no problem at SIG, then they're going to tell me there's no problem, and nobody's going to believe it. And if there is a problem, their lawyers, I'm sure, will very carefully have instructed them not to say there's a problem, because there will be significant consequences if they admit there's a problem, and then they're obligated to deal with it. Where if there is a problem and they just deny it and deny it and deny it, well, fixing it internally, then maybe they can get away with it without any major repercussions, except to their reputation, which they've now suffered fairly significantly. The thing is, we know SIG iterates parts in-house without necessarily documenting different product versions. That's not that unusual. And there is a very significant lag time in a lot of these cases between when was the pistol, if a pistol discharges and the guy's like, I didn't even touch it, I was in my holster and I did a hip wiggle and the gun went kablooey. Well, when was the pistol made? When did that guy purchase it? When did the incident happen? When did it become public? When did it turn into a lawsuit against SIG? Like, there's so much lag time in here that for all we know, the guns are absolutely perfectly reliable, and the problem is 1,000% gone if you buy a SIG right now, and maybe it's just an attempt by SIG to deny the problem until they can flush all of the problem guns out of the system. Frankly, if there is a quality control problem, I suspect that's more like what's probably going on, is SIG would have realized it. Like, SIG has the information to recognize these problems sooner than almost anybody else, because you know who's going to find out about every one of these problems? SIG, or they're going to find out about more of them than anyone else, because they're going to see everything that turns into a lawsuit against them in a way that we here in the general public are not necessarily going to. Anyway, once they recognize a problem, if they can figure out what it is, they can fix it quietly, especially if it's a quality control tolerance thing. There's going to be no obvious difference in any of the parts. The problem's just going to like stop happening, which is fine. If that's what's going on, it's sleazy from the company's perspective that they clearly know hypothetically, they would know that there is an issue with pistols that exist out in the wild, but they don't issue a recall. And you know what? It would be an incredibly painful recall for SIG. What is it? There's like 3.5 million of them apparently that have been made. How many of those would they have to recall? Oh, ugh. Like, this is a low, well, for the military, it was a low margin pistol. Who knows what that would do to SIG? It is not ethically correct for them to know that there's an issue if they do and not act on it. But at the same time, is it really surprising that they would? Really, no. It's disappointing. It would be disappointing, but it wouldn't be particularly surprising. So that seems to be the most likely explanation for these things to me. If we assume that the people that have had uncommanded discharges are telling the truth, and it seems like there's certainly enough of them that are respectable, known people. Their stories check out. There's video footage in some cases. It's never as good as people would like to see, but it does seem like there is a thing here. And if that's the case, I think tolerance stacking in a system like the 320 fire control unit it seems like the best way to account for these problems. So, and then of course it's exacerbated by the fact that they already have two other strikes against them, one being the drop safety issue that first got people's attention around these pistols, and then one being the relative ease of foreign objects pulling the trigger when you don't mean for it to be pulled because of the trigger system in the 320. Like, you put that together, the general public perception of the gun doesn't necessarily differentiate between these three types of issues. So, man, if they put a trigger safety in the thing from the very beginning, they probably could have avoided both of the first two issues to a large extent. And then maybe even if there was this third one, people wouldn't have really noticed it, and they'd have been able to get away with having it if it actually is the thing that it maybe is. So, quick thing, what is my relationship to SIG? I've had one in the past. SIG sent me a couple of guns. Not that one. This is actually a really cool military surplus first issue M17 that I really like. But they have given me some other guns. I'm actually about to go shoot Lynx Brutality with both a P365 and a Flux Raider Legion from SIG. They've never paid me for a firearms review, but they have given me some guns for free. So does that bias me to give them a blank check on something like this? No, it doesn't, but you'll, I guess, just have to take my word for that. I did also I was involved in helping write the first volume of the Vickers Guidebook on Sig Sauer, which did partially cover current modern day SIG in New Hampshire, although I really didn't have any part in writing that stuff because I know a lot more about the old SIGs, the old Swiss SIGs, than I do the current production ones. Anyway, like I said, I figured I'd throw my hat in the ring and do something. Like, someday I will be able to do a video where I say, here's what happened, and here's the timeline, and here's what caused it. But that day is not yet, because this is still very much a situation in flux, and I don't know the information that I would need to do that video yet. So that's all. Thanks.